we're going to be checking in on kind of the ecosystem of EVs, and we have an expert on the subject today, Tom Moloughney. Tom, thank you so much for joining me. What got you into electric vehicles, first off?
Well, it's been an interesting journey, Tory, and thanks for having me on the show. I had owned a restaurant for nearly 30 years, but I had always been interested in alternative fuel vehicles. I don't know, since I was a young kid, I grew up in the 70s. I don't know if you're old enough to remember the oil embargo and early 70s, the long gas lines. So my neighbor converted like this old Chevy to an electric car back in like 73 or 74. And I remember him taking me for a ride, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And I think that kind of gave me the bug that way back then. But, you know, fast forward many years later, I started trying to see if there was any alternative fuel vehicles, just out of curiosity. I loved tech. And that was really why, you know, this was new, it was different tech, you know, and was it hydrogen? Was it natural gas? Was it electric? What would be the alternative fuel vehicle that we kind of go into? And so as I was doing more and more research, I kind of honed in on electric. And I really thought that was going to be what took off.
This current climate, it looks like everybody is going towards EVs.
Well, it's true. They are. And, you know, we're just hearing about it now. It's not that hadn't been the case for the last few years, because it had. I mean, I get exposure to talk to executives from pretty much all the OEMs out there, and they knew this was coming. They saw this was coming. But you know what? Car companies don't like to talk about what they can't sell today. So even though most of the car companies understood 4 or 5 years ago that the whole industry was going to electrify within the next 10 to 20 years, they all understood this, at least the ones that weren't brain dead. And but they didn't want to say that because, you know, they like to talk about what they have in their showrooms today, not what they're going to have in their showrooms 10 years from now. So this isn't like all of a sudden this happened. These companies have been planning. They knew this was going to happen. I've been standing on my soapbox for a decade now. And for the first 4 or 5 years, people were saying, you know, you're nuts. Like, I'm not driving an electric car. Then for a couple of years, it was like, well, maybe they're starting to get better, but not until batteries get better. And now it's just kind of like, I'll eventually be driving one. I know, you know, seems like the whole industry's going that way. And it is.
But like originally, you know, you had Tesla, which was, you know, a brand new manufacturing company. And then you had Fisker, right? That was their big competitor. But now you're starting to see these legacy automotive companies building their own version of electric cars. What do you think is causing this trend?
So, yeah, I think that, you know, government, if you want to say intervention, has maybe made it happen quicker than it would have, setting, you know, CAFE gas standards, corporate, you know, average fuel economy standards. In Europe, they have strict standards on a certain percent of the fleet has to be zero emission. And what that really, the only thing that has done, in my opinion, is it's going to make this transition happen quicker, Tory. It was going to happen anyway, and it was simply going to happen because electric vehicles are better vehicles. That's period. That's what all the government intervention in the world, all the talk about saving the planet and all this, that's not going to put the vast majority of people in electric vehicles. They will only transition to these vehicles when they work for them and they're better. And we wouldn't get there. And with any new technology, it takes years before it really gets to the point where it's really good. I mean, look at plasma TVs. The first ones came out, they were small, they were $10,000. You know, if people didn't spend money on them, we would never get to where we are today. And it was kind of like that with electric vehicles, that the early ones weren't that great. They were very expensive. They didn't go that far. They didn't charge that fast. But the fact that government said, look, we need to move in this direction, and they put out subsidies and they kind of forced manufacturers to have a certain percentage of their vehicles zero emission. What that did was it helped pour investment into that and make it better. So we would have gotten to where we're going to go anyway without any incentives, but it would have taken an extra maybe decade.
Right. You know, you hear a lot of people talking about electric vehicles, how they're going to save the planet, right? No emissions. But I like what you said was they're just better vehicles. Like it's just a a better design, better machine. And it's interesting because that's the first time I've ever heard anybody kind of, just say for, regardless of whether it's, clean energy, emissions free, it's just a better vehicle. And I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with electric vehicles, until they get in one and drive one, they don't really understand it. They don't know the difference.
That's 100% true. I was always a car guy. I wasn't somebody who, was it, let's say, total environmentalist. Nothing against that. I mean, it's great to be an environmentalist, but I didn't get into electric vehicles for that. The fact that electric vehicles have that instant torque that you talked about and acceleration, there's no maintenance. There's, tires and wiper blades. You don't have to get oil changes. You don't have to worry about your muffler rotting out. You don't have to worry about someone stealing your catalytic converter. All these things, it's just tires and wiper blades. And the cost to refuel it is pennies. It costs me at home about $13 to $14 to charge my Tesla, and I can drive almost 300 miles on that. So, the overall cost, even if an electric car today, most comparable electric cars cost more than their comparable gas counterparts. But if you do total cost of ownership, it nets out, you're ahead. But that's another challenge because people look at an electric car on a showroom floor and say, ooh, that's $45,000. I'm going to get that $38,000 car. It's the same car, really, same size, same utility, all that stuff. And that one's $6,000 more. Do your running costs for 5 years on maintenance and fueling, and then take into consideration the possible incentives on that vehicle, and you'll actually save a few $1,000s. So that's one thing to understand, that besides doing so many things better, in my opinion, than the gas cars, not have to deal with maintenance and the fueling costs, they actually will have a total lower cost of ownership, even if the initial price is higher.
So you see, it's pretty much going to be the private sector that's going to really push EVs forward, or the infrastructure, the movement of electric vehicles forward.
Yeah, I really do. I think government will help facilitate it. Will incentives help make it happen a little bit faster than it would have otherwise? But this was going to happen, and it was really going to be brought on by individuals that want the vehicles because they're better, and private enterprise that sees potential to make money off of it. So, that's eventually going to be what really drives this industry. It's going to be consumer demand and, private enterprise that finds ways to make money off of it. It was very hard to do that 4 or 5 years ago because there wasn't a lot of really good electric vehicles available. Number one. Number two, they were expensive. Number three, since there wasn't a lot of them out there, private investment didn't want to put in charging stations because you'd be pouring hundreds of $1,000s to put these things in the ground, and then one person a day might roll up and use it. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg. But now that we've got these public funds available to help expedite the installation of nationwide high-speed charging networks, what's going to happen is the cars will come because, if the charging stations are there, more people are going to buy electric vehicles. They were afraid to buy them when they knew where all the gas stations were, but nobody saw high-speed charging stations, and that made them a little apprehensive.
Do you see a difference like in different parts of the country? When the temperature, you have an extreme cold or extreme heat, do you find that your battery life or your charge lasts longer or is shortened by extreme weather?
100%. Batteries are interesting. They're like humans. They like the same temperatures we do. Batteries most happy when it's between like 70 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Right. And that's when you get your optimal performance out of a battery. Once it starts getting much colder or much hotter, it doesn't perform as well as it does in that real sweet spot. So when it gets really cold, what happens is, the battery doesn't get damaged. The chemical reactions inside the battery slow down. So it's not able to I guess, exert as much energy as it can at the proper temperature. So what you'll have is the battery that can propel a car, say 300 miles in perfect conditions, might only be able to propel it 240 or 250 miles when it's, 30 degrees Fahrenheit. and it gets worse when it gets down under 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Then now instead of 300 miles, you might have 200 miles or 190 miles. So yes, the performance suffers the colder it gets, but there are ways to get around that. The cars can do something called preconditioning, where when the car's plugged in, you tell it, look, I'm leaving at 8 o'clock in the morning at night before when you plug it in. So at 7 o'clock in the morning, it wakes itself back up and it warms the battery up. So when you're leaving, the car's still at 100% charged, but the battery is like at 50 degrees Fahrenheit instead of 10 degrees. So what happens is, yes, it warms itself up to extend its driving range. So, and all the new electric cars have good, sophisticated thermal management systems that help warm it up. That wasn't the case 5, 6, 7 years ago. So, what we're doing is industry now is recognizing the problems and they're creating solutions to them.
Your explanations have cleared a lot of mystery for me, where it's like, if somebody's on the fence or just curious about where EVs are going, there's this one issue that, some people don't really address, and it's the affordability, right? What if you can't afford a brand new electric car? It's just not in your budget to buy an electric car. It's going to be a lot easier to buy a used internal combustion engine. When are the electric vehicles going to be cheap enough that everybody can afford them?
Right. So that's a great question. I've been calling for affordable EVs, for a long time, but I could call for it all I want. If it wasn't possible to make them and sell them at that price, the car companies weren't going to. And that's why we have incentives. That's why we have the federal tax credit of up to $7,500. Why some states have incentives. Well, you talk about affordable. It's what's affordable for you might be different for me, might be different for someone else. But what I can say is the cost of electric vehicles has been dropping dramatically. There are good electric vehicles available today for not that much money. Now, let's say Nissan Leaf. I don't know if you're aware of this. You could buy a Nissan Leaf today, base Nissan Leaf. It with the smaller battery pack. They sell one with a bigger battery pack. The smaller battery pack goes about 165 miles per charge, somewhere around there. It's $27,500 or 27,000, somewhere around there. And you qualify for the $7,500 federal tax credit if you qualify for it. So it's under $20,000. You could have a brand new electric vehicle today. So that's one. There's a Mini Cooper SE that's only $29,000. The Chevy Bolt EV, which, there was a stop sale on them until they figured this battery problem out, but now it's starting to sell again. That's right around $30,000. So after incentives, there are electric vehicles you could buy today that are around $20,000, and that's relatively affordable. Right. That's cool. And there's also used EVs. There wasn't used EVs available 5, 6, 7 years ago because they were just coming out. But now we're getting the first wave of people that owned EVs for 3, 4, 5 years are trading them in for new vehicles. And so we're getting used EVs that are out there on the market that you can buy for under $20,000, $15,000, $16,000.
That is awesome. Tom, I can't thank you enough. Like, this has been so eye-opening. I mean, you've just, you have a clear understanding of EVs, and I just really appreciate you coming on and kind of dispelling a lot of the questions that people have, I think.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun, and we got to get you in an electric car soon. Okay.